Sanders to Pakistan. The world is trying to rake up the Kashmir issue. Most of them want to meddle, citing a humanitarian crisis. That's their favorite term. A lot of fake videos are doing the rounds. There is no obvious evidence, but that hasn't stopped the world from exaggerating the situation in Kashmir. First, the U.S. president offered to mediate. Now the Democratic leader is talking about what's happening in Kashmir and taking a moral high ground. China, on the other hand, has pushed Pakistan's case at the United Nations. They will continue to do so. Now, we are 2 weeks away from the UN General Assembly, and we can tell you that there will be more sermons on Kashmir. So for these world leaders who express concern about humanitarian issues, we'd like to share what's happening in their own countries and why that should be their immediate priorities. We have a few videos and statistics that tell you the story of humanitarian crises unfolding in America and China. Let's start with the neighbor, China. Human rights in China do not sit well in one sentence. Let's show you why. This is what happened over the weekend in China: fire and fear in Hong Kong. Well, the visuals tell the story. Policemen armed to the teeth taking on peaceful protesters. This is the 14th week of protests. This weekend saw some of the worst violence. Tens of thousands of protesters held rallies, and China responded with fury. This is how China treats its own people. This is the state of human rights in China. Hong Kong is burning, literally and figuratively. Public places have been vandalized in the violence between police and protesters. And China is responding to all of this with brute force. Water cannons are being used to spray ink on protesters in Hong Kong. They are being marked, basically. Potential targets that Beijing will take to task later. Put simply, Beijing is singling out protesters by inking them. Police also sprayed pepper solutions on the protesters in Hong Kong. The protests continue today. Thousands of students boycotted school to take part in pro-democracy rallies. China continues to threaten these peaceful protesters. For this country to talk about a possible humanitarian crisis elsewhere is a bit rich. They can stop pretending to be guardians of humanitarian values. Nobody's buying that line from China. Next, we come to the United States. They try to take the moral high ground on pretty much everything, Kashmir included. But look at America's own record. Forget about what they do in faraway lands, unleashing war to establish dominance and to control oil markets. Look at how the United States treats its own people. 994 in 2015, 962 in 2016, 986 people in 2017, 992 people in 2018, 602 people in 2019, and this year is far from over. What are these numbers? These are the numbers of people who were shot and killed by the US police. American civilians killed by the police in cold blood. Let me repeat, nearly 1,000 people are killed every year in America by the police. And there is no accountability. Even the names of many of these policemen are not disclosed, let alone punishing them. This is a government shooting down its own people. What gives America then the authority to talk about human rights and humanitarian crises elsewhere? I have more data, and I can tell you about a pattern. According to a recent report in a scientific journal, the PNAS, police violence is a leading cause of death for young men in the United States. 1 in every 1,000 black men can be expected to be killed by the police over their lifetimes. Minority groups are more vulnerable to police killings than white men and women. And this is the state of affairs many decades after the Civil War in the U.S. It's unbecoming of America then, or its leaders, to preach human rights to anyone, least of all India.